Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the People Performance Podcast brought to you by T2, the People Performance People. This week we're bringing you something a little different as we slowly come back from summer break. Teams, leaders everywhere getting back into the rhythm of work, new priorities, new challenges, and of course plenty of uncertainty and change. It's a topic we know every leadership team is navigating. So today we're bringing you a keynote from Martin Johnson, recorded live at our T2 leadership retreat this year, where he explores what it really takes to lead through uncertainty and change. Let's get into it.
I'm going to open today's keynote with 4 big things that are causing this uncertainty and change, which inevitably has a knock-on effect in our business, in our lives. I'm going to talk to you for about 25 minutes, and hopefully it will set the tone for the whole retreat and the themes that you're going to be working on in the rooms with your consultants and as we go throughout the 3 days. The first of the big 4 things that we see at T2 causing this change and this uncertainty is geopolitical unrest. Now that sounds like a really big thing, but it absolutely is. We're seeing more than ever in recent years that we have challenges with global leaders, one in particular causing havoc that has a knock-on effect in economies, in societies, in the way we run our businesses. This is going to continue for a period of time, and leaders and businesses have to understand that this is not going to change. So navigating this landscape and understanding what it means for our organizations is really important. But without question, we live in an era over the next decade where this is going to continue to happen from a geopolitical perspective. The second big one, we hear about this all the time, and I think we're feeling it a little bit at the moment, aren't we? It's quite nice at the moment, to be fair, but climate change. This is having a huge impact on governments, decisions, economies, and societies. It's absolutely impacting the way that we run our businesses and the considerations and the policies that we have to have. And leaders are wrestling with this. What do we do? What is our responsibility? How does it affect us and our future? The third big one is AI. AI is a huge thing at the minute for organizations, and we don't quite know what we're doing with it just yet, do we? Do we go all in on an AI strategy? Do we AI everything? Do we just choose the little bits of AI that will offer us competitive advantage? Is it safe? Is it not safe? What do we do with AI to be able to transform our businesses? And it's a real tipping point at the minute. If we don't get on board with it, we get left behind. If we get too embedded and reliant upon it, what does that mean for the future of our businesses? And I think leaders are really struggling with this around what's right for them. We'll circle back to that in a short while. The fourth one, which I think is something we all have to take away from this and moving forward, and we're seeing it here at T2 as one of the biggest topics when it comes to leadership, is generational shift. We have 5 generations in a workplace, and in a short while, after I've talked to you about something else, I'm actually going to get you to put your hand up on which generation you think you sit, well, not what you think you sit in, what you know you sit in by date of birth. We have 5 generations in a workplace, through to the silent generation, right through to Generation Z. I'm going to give you the stats and the percentages of what different generations represent in an organization, but there is huge discrepancies between the top generations and the emerging generations in the way their brain function works, in the way they communicate, they like to receive communication. And I think leaders are struggling with this. Too often in our leadership programs, we see some of the older generations coming through saying, they don't listen anymore. They don't make them like they used to. Nobody wants to do this anymore. Nobody wants to take accountability. Everybody wants to work flexibly from home. And we're struggling with how we bridge the gap in generational shift in organizations. I'm going to circle back to that towards the end of the keynote. But before I do, some of you might have heard me talk about this before. One of the things this retreat is designed to do is to help you all embrace this performance model. And I want you to take this first point away from this. We work with elite sports teams. We work with public sector frontline services. We work with global corporations. And we work with people who are on a daily basis under pressure, who are having to navigate change and uncertainty and deliver what they're there to deliver. Peak and high performance gets bandied around a lot on YouTube, in leadership curriculum, in memes, in all sorts of podcasts you will listen to. It's high-performing teams this, peak performers do this. And it can feel quite overwhelming because I bet my bottom dollar, even your journey in today felt anything but high or peak performance, didn't it? Right, we'll come back to that. The brain's really interesting. Everything we do at T2, we underpin with psychology. And for some of you who have been through a lot of work with us, you'll know we talk about the chimp brain and we talk about the core functions of human existence, what drives behaviors. But let me give you a little sequence that all of your brains go through every single time you're trying to achieve something. And you'll probably resonate with the fact that you've gone through this process just this morning. Your brain has to satisfy 3 questions in everything you do. And if there's a first note you make in your journal, let it be this, because I think it will help you understand why you feel a bit anxious or stressed or pressured when situations arrive. So the 3 questions the brain will ask is this: duration, path, outcome. Duration, path, outcome. What does that mean? So in order to have a degree of control, the brain will say, duration, how long is this going to take me? Path, how do I get there? Outcome, where am I going, or what does the outcome look like? So you was all planning to be here, planes, trains and automobiles. There's probably a couple who are still going to come in off a flight in a short while. And the stress level in the brain and the body ramps up when you go, how long have I got to get there? How am I going to get there? And what's the outcome when I get there? And if anything happens along the way that jeopardizes duration, path, outcome, the brain doesn't like it and it gets a little bit stressed because it's all about having control. So what I would say is if you ever feel under pressure or if the world is changing around you, the key to adaptability is to do duration, path, outcome. What is under threat here? Am I absolutely against it for time? Is time running out, or my original time frames are now under pressure and stress? Path, has something changed in my plan? Is something now in my way that I planned to do it like this and now I can no longer do that, so I've got to change the path? Or outcome, am I really severely or at risk of not being able to achieve the outcome I want to achieve? And if so, is the outcome still possible, or do I need to redefine what that flag looks like? Duration, path, outcome is what the brain needs to understand and have met whenever you're taking on any endeavour. And I'm sure as you arrived here today, your duration, path, outcome, I think Stacey, you this morning put on the group straight away, trains cancelled. Oh my God, duration, path, outcome is now in jeopardy. What do I do? How do I navigate this situation? So remember that, because it's something that I always talk to my kids about, actually, my teenage daughters about. If there's a problem, we'd go through duration, path, outcome. What is under threat here? What do we control and how do we redefine this? And I'm going to come back to that shortly. But peak and high performance, I'm here to debunk it. Peak performance looks like this. So if anybody in your organization talks about this, you have my permission now to challenge them, all right? Because peak performance occurs when a team or individual meticulously plan to peak to the highest point of performance at a future point in time. Does that make sense? The only environment I've ever really witnessed or seen where peak performance can actually happen is Olympic programs, because athletes 4 years in advance prepare to peak at a certain point in time at 12:30 on the 26th of July 2012 to run round a track 4 times and win a gold medal. And everything is controlled, their diet, their regime, you know, their wellness, right? They're guarding against illness throughout their training. They peak at a certain point in time. But in order to do this, you need to have high predictability in your environment. You need to have high control, low uncertainty. You need to have all the resources, and you need to have no distractions. Does that sound like your workplace? Absolutely not, right? No workplace is like that. So you are not in the business of peak performance. What you are all in the business of, and we know this because we work with so many organizations across industry, you are in the business of optimal performance. And the first leadership point of this retreat I want to make is this: if you are going to lead through uncertainty and change, you have to get bloody good at optimal performance. So what is that? Optimal performance occurs when a team or individual do the best they can with the time they have and the resources at their disposal. You simply do the very best you can with the time you have and the resources at your disposal. In the military, we always had a saying, no plan survives first contact, and it doesn't. So you've got to be willing to adapt and improvise. And I know we've got firefighters in the room and all sorts of people from different walks of life. You will get what I mean. You have to perform optimally. And sometimes that won't feel like high and peak performance. In fact, as you can see on this grid here, sometimes it might feel like flow. Flow is it everything's going well and we're delivering it to a high standard. And if you're in manufacturing, by the way, you'll also understand this. Some of it might feel like drudgery. I love that word. You know, like when you're banging your head against a brick wall, nothing's going right, but you're just making decisions and advancing forward and moving one step at a time. I tell you, in my 11 years of doing this job and even the 9 years previous in consulting, so 20 years of observing performance, the best leaders are not high performance leaders and peak performance leaders and all this. The best leaders come alive in drudgery. They roll up their sleeves when the going gets tough and when that duration path outcome is under threat. They roll up their sleeves. They make decisions, they take action and they advance forwards. And then we'll reassess where we're at. We'll make decisions, then we'll advance forwards. And they chunk up a bigger problem into smaller, manageable chunks. And that is the key to optimal performance. You simply do the best you can with the time you've got and the resources at your disposal. And if you're going to get good at navigating change and uncertainty and being an adaptable leader, you have to embrace optimal performance. You have to come alive in drudgery. And why is that important? All right, Susie. Why is that important? Because high performance is the byproduct of continuous optimal performance. If you flip optimal performance up on an angle and you put your flag on the hill, your mission, your end goal, or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, and you form a habit of digging in drudgery and making decisions and realigning on duration path outcome, you will end up with a high performance outcome. High performance occurs when a team or individual form a habit of optimal performance, and they get really good at it. They get really good at it. I promise you, over the next 3 days, this will seem like a well-oiled machine. You will think, how did you do 3 days and nights without anything going wrong? I know I'm jinxing it now, but you will think that. Because when the drudgery happens, we are like ninjas in drudgery. You won't even notice it, all right? That's my promise. People come alive in drudgery. They embrace the chaos. They embrace the uncertainty. And they do something really simple. They say, duration path outcome, what is under threat here? What decisions do I need to take to just advance forwards that little bit further? And this is what we see really good leaders do when they're in that drudgery. On day 3, you're going to go through your attributes reports with the consultants. You've all took that long test. You remember the attributes test you did, and it was about 260 questions, and you was losing the will to live. Well, it will actually provide some amazing insight for you. And what it's going to do, and I want you to make a mental note of this, maybe in your journals, is one of the attributes you've been tested on is compartmentalization. And I want to see where it sits in your stack rank on day 3. If it's at the top of your stack rank and you're really good at this, then brilliant. But let's see how that's serving you well and how you do it. If it's lower down, do not be deterred. I'm not a great compartmentalization person. Mine is quite low in my report. So I've got to really work hard to compartmentalize what we do. So day 3 will actually give you some insight into that. But compartmentalization, from a psychology perspective, is how well you chunk up your wider environment and you take the bigger task at hand and you're able to focus on what's right in front of you and what needs immediate attention. And if you're going to navigate change and uncertainty and be really good at optimal performance and digging in drudgery, you need to be able to compartmentalize. When you try to eat the whole pie at once, it can become incredibly overwhelming. And we speak to so many leaders who get burnt out because they're trying to solve the whole problem. One of the things you must do as a leader is when you're faced with a big challenge or it seems insurmountable, the first thing you've got to get good at is compartmentalization. Chunk it up into what's right in front of me, what needs my immediate focus, and what do I need to make a decision on to advance us that little bit forward. So moving the horizon is another thing that I talk about. Shorten the window of view. Sometimes I take it week by week at T2. These guys will hear me banging on about it all the time. Where do we need to be by Friday? What does good look like by Friday? Forget the month, forget the quarter. What puts us on track to be on for a good month and quarter by Friday? And then we say, well, maybe A, B, and C. Okay, that seems achievable. Let's go for that by Friday, and we'll reassess where we go next after that. And everything seems so much more manageable when you move the horizon forward. Great leaders and people who overcome challenge, adversity, and perform optimally in drudgery, they bring the horizon forward and they sprint to that point, and then we'll reassess then. And so, duration path outcome is something I want you to take from this opening talk. If you're going to navigate change and uncertainty, you need to get really good at optimal performance. And you need to come alive in drudgery. And if you're going to do that, you need to be able to compartmentalize the bigger picture to smaller chunks. You need to bring that horizon forward. And then you need to create your duration path outcome and sprint to that point. And then guess what? We'll assess where we are and we can go again. Circling back, generations. I want to talk about this to finish my opening keynote because I know you all face it in your organisations, but for the first time ever, we have the biggest gap between the lower generation and the higher generation in terms of brain function, in terms of communication, in terms of the world they have grown up in, and it's creating a communication challenge for leaders as we go forward. We've done some work on generations. I wrote a whole chapter in my second book, I Am Human, Pain and Pleasure. Our occupational psychologist, Lydia, did a dissertation on it. We have quite an extensive bunch of research around generations. And what we're finding now is we can share some emerging science and information with you that will make you think over these 3 days and when you go back into your organisations around how we're leading different generations in our organisation. A generation is defined as a time span of 15 years. Karl Mannheim's theory, cohort theory, said if you take a 15-year period of time, a school, almost a full school cycle, then the people who grew up within that era would have had the same social experiences, the same parental influences. They'll have grown up with the similar digital experiences and from a technology perspective. And therefore, although all human beings are different, we can draw some conclusions around how different generations work in general and some patterns of behaviour. The first generation we come across is the silent generation. I am going to ask you to show hands. I don't think we'll have anybody in this bracket. These are people born between 1926 and 1945. They do make up 1% of the workforce today. And what we find is they're usually sort of board members, chairs, the people who are still keeping their brains active, who are still having a say in organisations. But we're seeing it at just 1%. Do we have any silent generation in today? Okay, I'm expecting more hands when we get to the next few generations. So 1%, I don't think we need to do too much of this, but what's worth noting about this generation is the influence it had on the next generation coming through as generally their parents. The silent generation grew up pre-war, and they genuinely grew up pre-digital industrial revolution. So there's no technology at this point, right? So what we see in that is they respected authority and hierarchy. In fact, the silent generation was to be seen and not heard. So what we saw through that generation in the pre and post-war is that they were really, really good at fitting into hierarchies. They generally took direction and instruction and challenge better. They were resilient, really resilient generation. Live through the World War, you have to be resilient. And they had more perseverance and staying power than the generations that we see coming after. Now, what's important to note about these are the parents of the next generation, which is baby boomers, born 1946 to 1964. I'm expecting no hands. Exactly. Okay, so we haven't got any baby boomers in, but believe it or not, 12% of organisations are still baby boomers, right? And what's unique about this is the majority of that 12% are in positions of leadership or management, naturally, as you get older and as you have more experience. So we have quite a lot of baby boomers in positions of leadership in organisations. Now, this was post-war, the prosperity of an optimistic future. The term baby boomers comes from the fact that nobody was having babies through the war. Why would you, right? So as soon as the war was over, everybody started having babies, and we had this huge boom in the birth rate in these years. What also happened is the home ownership of silent generation was 8%. Only 8% of the population owned a home. Baby boomers, it shot up to 40%. 40% of baby boomers owned their own home for the first time. So we had this huge progression in society when the baby boomers came along. Now, these still keep the communication style and the respect for hierarchy like the silent generation did. So these grew up in the workplace going, there's a hierarchy here, you have to earn your stripes, you do as you're told, you learn and you progress through delivering and producing. So they keep some of that stoic, if you like, the qualities of the silent generation, but they're more progressive, they're more risk-taking, they live in a more prosperous and opportunistic world, and they develop the decision-making skills and the innovation skills more than any previous generation. We still have 12% in organisations, and a lot of them are in leadership, positions of leadership, and they carry the communication style, if you remember, and the characteristics of the silent generation. Gen X, 1965 to 1979, we've got to have some hands, Gen X in the room, a lot. So now you start to see that it correlates with the percentages. 37% of organisations are Generation X. These are the first generation that truly start to become digital immigrants. So the birth of MTV, computer consoles, Sky Digital with the clicker on the wall with 4 channels. You know, this is the first push into the digital industrial revolution. Early mobile telephony starts to come online and the birth of the internet. So these are what we call the first digital immigrants. They're also the first generation that has become more independent than any previous generation. And you know the reason why and what the research suggests? It's the first period in time where both mother and father go out to work. And so kids were left at home. Let yourself in from school, sort your own tea out, right? Kids started to have to get independent earlier because both mother and father were having careers and going out into the workplace. And so Gen X are the first digital immigrants. They're progressive. They're more independent. They still carry over some of the qualities of the baby boomers in terms of respect for hierarchy, but they're starting to challenge a little bit more now, and they're starting to have a little bit more of a desire for work-life balance and for independence. 37%, a lot of the Gen Xs are in positions of leadership and management right now. Millennials. These get a bad rap. I'm just in, by the way, on the millennials, so I'm going to put my hand up. Are there any millennials in the room? Okay, so you can see, and this reflects it in your organisation, the majority of the management structure, as I'll show you in a short while, is made up of Gen X and millennials, early millennials. This generation, me and Lydia talk about this all the time, this is one where you could split it into 2 generations. You've got early millennials, born 1980 to 1990, and then you've got the late millennials. And it's almost like 2 different generations because the rapid speed of technology evolves so quickly throughout this generation that half of them are digital immigrants, like me. We learned to use technology, but we never grew up with it. And half are digitally native. They almost started to grow up with it from an early age. So millennials became really, really progressive when it came to the digital industrial revolution. They challenged more than any previous generation. This is the generation we start to lose a little bit of that be seen and not heard. It's a little bit of, let's challenge a little bit of hierarchy. Let's have a strength of voice. And millennials really, really started to demand their own terms when they got into the workplace around flexibility. One of the things that we see in this generation is they had more choice than ever. Prior to this, you were bound by proximity. You worked for an organisation within a proximity to where you lived. We see millennials starting to be able to work for anybody, anywhere, with the emergence of the internet and technology and tools. So when there's more choice than ever, organisations struggle with retention because if I don't like it where I am, I can move. Does this make sense? So we see this, the power shifting over to this generation. 36% of organisations are there. Gen Z. So this is the big one I want to finish on for my keynote today. 1995 to 2009. Do we have any Gen Z in the room? Ella, I love that, at the back. Ella just went, I'm going to put my hand up. By the way, Ella's a rock star, Gen Z rock star. Gen Z, they are now making up 14% of your organisation. They are the younger generation in the organisation. But here's the kicker. In the next decade, in the next 10 years, that will rise from 14% to about 40%. Nearly half of your organization will be made up of Gen Z. And if you are not preparing for that now, you will lose. You will absolutely lose. These are strong digital natives. These have grown up with technology, so much so that it has changed the structure and the way that the brain functions in Generation Z. And I'm going to share exactly what that looks like in a second. They challenge authority. They are politically progressive. They have access to information on geopolitics, on world events. They form conclusions and opinions far earlier than we ever could. Whether that's right or wrong or indifferent is a completely different discussion. But they are politically progressive, and they absolutely live in a world where they have freedom of choice over where they work, who they work for, and what they do. So Generation Z are coming in. This is what it looks like right now. But if you imagine this as a moving graph, in just a decade from now, in 10 years from now, silent generations are going to be gone. Well, maybe hopefully not physically, but maybe. Silent generations are going to be gone from the workplace. Baby boomers will reduce and will almost be fully retired by this point. Gen X and millennials will start to go over the hill. They're dominant in positions of leadership and management now, but in the not too distant future, in a decade, Gen Xers will start to retire, as will early millennials. And you'll see this huge rise in Generation Z actually coming into positions of leadership and management and significance. Following them, Generation Alpha, which again is a whole different topic, and they're going to be AI native. Generation Alpha will be the first generation that is AI native. So if you are under any illusions that you have to get on board with what AI means for you, trust me, when you have 60% of your organization that are digitally and AI native, you don't have an option. They are the evolution of us, if that makes sense. And so let me finish this by just talking around what I mean and why I can present some evidence to you around this. If you ever get frustrated, like I do with my teenage daughters, around communication, I'm about to explain why. They're starting to IQ test Generation Z and build a database of what is happening in terms of where they score highly to previous generations and what is actually reducing in cognitive function. And this is the result so far. In IQ testing and cognitive testing, Generation Z score higher than any previous generation, any of us in this room, on rapid information filtering. They can consume information into the brain far quicker than we can, and they can filter through that to find the most important and relative bits of information. They are absolute whizzes at being able to do that, especially when it's digitally. Visual processing, this goes hand in hand. They can process colours and shapes and visual stimulation better than any previous generation. If you want a live example of this, you watch my 11-year-old son play Minecraft on an Xbox, and he's controlling 5 things on his controller. The screen's moving. I feel sick watching it, and he is absolutely lasered in and on the button. The visual processing and the rapid information filtering is far greater in Generation Z than it is in any previous. And pattern recognition. If you put them on an app or a system and give them 1 hour, they will work out exactly how to use that app, how the processes work, and then they'll be training you within 2 hours on how to use it. Trust me. So their brains have evolved to a point at which they are far superior with technology and AI than us. However, it has come at a cost. And if there's one thing you take from my talk this morning, please let it be this. In Generation Z and Alpha coming behind, we are seeing significant declines in IQ testing and in cognitive functioning around sustained attention and focus, around critical thinking, and around working memory and general memory. And here's the reason why. Because they live in a world where they don't have to critically think and solve problems, because they just Google it. The part of the brain that has traditionally been really strong at solving problems and then storing that solution in your brain's computer, your memory, the brain's very clever. It says, if we don't need this function, we'll just shut it down in the brain and we'll focus on evolving through neuroplasticity other parts of the brain. So the Gen Z brain is changing because they don't need to solve problems anymore, because I can work it out through technology, or I can get the answer. Why does the memory then not be needed? Because I remember when my dad taught me to change a car tyre, and he said, I'm going to show you one, son, and And if you ever break down on the motorway, you need to remember what I'm showing you because you're on your own. So I had to learn how to change a tyre and then put it in my computer to remember for when I broke down. A Gen Z breaks down now, they just call the AA or they put a YouTube video on how to change a tyre. They don't need to then remember how to do it because if they break down again, they'll just put YouTube on again. Does this make sense? We're seeing working memory and critical thinking reduce. That also comes with sustained attention. My son's diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm telling you now in Generation Z and Alpha, we will see more ADHD diagnosed than any previous generation, not because it's a genetic fault, because the structure of the brain is changing and attentiveness is reducing in Generation Z because they don't need it and because they're constantly on with technology and they need quick bites of information and quick stimulation. So you'll see a lot of attention deficit in the younger generations. So what does this mean? This just means that we have to find a way. I think Gen X and Millennials, you lot in the room now, are the key to unlocking the transition to the future. We have to, if you think about evolution, every previous generation has passed on the knowledge to the next generation. Wisdom is how we've evolved. They don't need our wisdom now because they have all the answers themselves. But I still think it's important as Gen Xers and Millennials that we say, we have some wisdom that can help you, but we've got to cater for an environment which is going to allow Generation Z and allow the future generations to flourish. Getting the balance between wisdom and embracing the future is where it's going to be at. And the brain can develop focus, critical thinking and memory, but you've got to think as leaders, what things can you do in the workplace to put Generation Z in a scenario where they have to critically think? Phones away, AI away, if this was a problem today, how would we solve it? Some of the things we do at T2 is to test critical thinking and working memory and to do it without the use of technology to keep those areas of the brain fully developed and alive. So, I'm slightly over, so we're going to wrap this up now. Leading through uncertainty and change will be the biggest challenge of the next decade. There are 4 big reasons for that: geopolitical unrest, climate change, AI, and generational shift. You need to have these considerations as leaders as you go through in your organizations and say to yourself, what am I doing over the next 10 years to be able to create a workplace that caters for the future of Generation Z and Alpha while still passing on the wisdom that you have. As you go through the next 3 days, this is going to be the ultimate experiment in 2 things. You're going to learn so much about yourself and how you respond through change and uncertainty and how your brain works. But the biggest thing you're going to observe, and please come back to me on day 3, is we've taken 50 strangers and you watch the teamship, the trust, the friendships and the camaraderie we will all build over 3 days and nights together. And you can take some of these principles back to the workplace. So that's all from me for this opener. Hopefully there's a lot in there, and hopefully it gives you some considerations of the next 10 years and how we're going to have to get really good at adapting to change. The final thing I'm going to reveal before I hand you over to Bernice is this. We have recruited 3 moles amongst you. Moles, all right? The moles will work for me throughout 3 days with some subtle tasks inside the groups, inside the activities on an evening, and they will be undertaking some secret tasks. Your job is to rat out the moles, all right? The moles, you need to go and detect it, okay? By coffee break this morning, upon registration, we've randomly selected 3 of you to be the moles. I want you to check your WhatsApp by the first coffee break. If you are in a group called Mole HQ, game on, all right? And you will await further instructions. It's nothing too daunting, it's light fun, and there's a couple of serious bits within it as well. However, at the end of the retreat, you will all get to vote on who you think the 3 moles are. And if you just get one of the 3, just one, you will have a free £2,000 cash bar at the end of Retreat Social. If they go undetected, you're on expenses and the moles are on a free bar. So moles, we're playing to win. You guys, if you detect any strange behaviour over the next 3 days, maybe make a mental note of it. Or if you detect anybody who might be working for me. So please go with it. And if you are in Mole HQ by the first coffee break, don't make it obvious. All right? That's all from me. I'm going to leave you now with Bernice to put you into your groups. Listen, throw yourself into it, relax the shoulders, have a great time, and I promise you, you're going to get so much out the next 3 days. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
The People Performance Podcast, brought to you by T2.